Hi, I'm Andrea. 3 months ago, I thought I knew my brother better than anyone in the world. We'd grown up sharing everything: secrets, dreams, even our first apartment after college. So when my credit card was declined at Target while buying groceries, and the cashier quietly mentioned something about my account being frozen due to suspicious activity, I laughed it off. Identity theft happens to other people, right? Not to someone whose biggest financial decision was whether to splurge on name-brand cereal. But as I sat in that bank parking lot 2 hours later, staring at a printout showing a mortgage application for $750,000 in my name, for a house I'd never seen, in a neighborhood I couldn't afford, with an income that was mysteriously triple what I actually made, I realized that sometimes the person who steals your identity isn't a stranger in a dark hoodie. Sometimes it's the person who taught you how to ride a bike. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Part 1. The unraveling the fluorescent lights in First National Bank buzzed overhead like angry wasps as I sat across from Mr. Rodriguez, the fraud prevention specialist, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on this Tuesday afternoon. He slid another document across his desk, his expression carefully neutral in that way, bank employees perfect when delivering devastating news. "Ms. Chen," he said, using my last name with uncomfortable formality. "According to our records, you applied for and received a jumbo mortgage 3 weeks ago. The loan amount was $750,000, and the down payment of $150,000 was transferred from what appears to be your business account." I stared at the paperwork, my name printed clearly at the top in block letters. My signature, or what looked exactly like my signature, sprawled across the bottom of page after page. My social security number, my employment information, even my mother's maiden name, all filled in with meticulous accuracy. "But I don't have a business account," I said, my voice sounding distant and strange. "I work at Morrison Marketing. I make $52,000 a year. I drive a 2018 Honda Civic that I'm still paying off. I live in a one-bedroom apartment where the air conditioning only works if you hit it with a shoe." Mr. Rodriguez nodded sympathetically, but his eyes held the weary look of someone who'd seen this particular brand of disaster too many times. Identity theft cases can be quite complex, especially when they involve family members or people with intimate knowledge of your personal information. Family members. The words hit me like ice water. "What makes you think it's a family member?" He pulled out another file, thicker than the first. The application included several personal references and emergency contacts. Your parents, David and Susan Chen, were listed. Your brother Michael was listed as your business partner and co-signer on several financial documents. The employment verification came from a company called Chen Digital Solutions, which, according to our research, was incorporated just 6 months ago with you listed as the primary owner. My hands started shaking. Michael. My big brother, who'd always been the ambitious one, the one with grand plans and bigger dreams than his bank account could support. The one who'd been talking nonstop for the past year about wanting to buy a house in Scottsdale, about how he was tired of throwing money away on rent, about how real estate was the key to building wealth. "Can I see the address?" I asked, already knowing in my gut what I was going to find. Mr. Rodriguez hesitated, then turned his computer screen toward me. The mortgage was for 1247 Desert Vista Drive, Scottsdale, Arizona. A quick Google search on my phone brought up the property listing. A stunning contemporary home with floor-to-ceiling windows, a pool that looked like it belonged in a resort, and a price tag that made my student loan debt look like pocket change. I recognized it immediately. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Michael had shown me this exact house 3 months ago, scrolling through the photos on his phone during Sunday dinner at our parents' place. He'd gone on and on about the open floor plan, the smart home technology, the 3-car garage where he could finally set up his workshop. When our mom had gently pointed out that the house was way outside his budget as a freelance graphic designer, he'd gotten that stubborn look he'd worn since childhood and said he was working on something big, something that would change everything. Apparently, that something was stealing my identity. "I need to make some calls," I told Mr. Rodriguez, standing abruptly. "How long do I have to dispute this?" "The sooner the better," he replied, handing me a thick packet of fraud documentation forms. "But Ms. Chen, if this is indeed identity theft, you'll need to file a police report. This isn't just a banking error. This is federal fraud we're talking about." The drive home was a blur. I called in sick to work, which wasn't exactly a lie since I felt like I might throw up at any moment. My phone kept buzzing with texts from Rachel, my best friend and roommate, asking if I was okay since I'd left the apartment that morning in crisis mode and hadn't been heard from since. Instead of going straight home, I found myself driving toward Scottsdale, toward Desert Vista Drive. I needed to see it with my own eyes, needed to confirm that this wasn't some elaborate mistake or misunderstanding. Maybe Michael had just put my name down as a reference without thinking it through. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation that didn't involve my brother systematically destroying my financial life. The house was even more impressive in person. It sat on a corner lot in an exclusive development, where every lawn was perfectly manicured and every mailbox probably cost more than my monthly rent. The 3-car garage was open, and I could see Michael's beat-up Toyota Corolla parked next to a brand-new BMW that definitely hadn't been in his possession the last time I'd seen him. As I sat in my car across the street trying to process what I was seeing, the front door opened and Michael emerged, laughing into his phone. He was wearing clothes I'd never seen before, expensive-looking jeans, and a polo shirt that actually fit him properly instead of the thrift store finds that usually made up his wardrobe. He looked relaxed, happy, like a man who'd finally gotten everything he'd ever wanted. Behind him came a woman I didn't recognize, tall and blonde, with the kind of confident stride that spoke of yoga classes and bottomless brunches. She wrapped her arms around Michael's waist and kissed his cheek, and he spun her around like they were starring in a romantic comedy. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. 3 weeks ago, Michael had been complaining about having to choose between buying groceries and paying his car insurance. 3 weeks ago, he'd been crashing on our parents' couch because his roommate had moved out, and he couldn't afford the rent on his apartment alone. 3 weeks ago, he'd borrowed $40 from me to take a girl out to dinner. And now he was living in a $750,000 house with a girlfriend who looked like she stepped out of a lifestyle magazine. I was still sitting there, trying to work up the courage to march up to the front door and demand an explanation, when my phone rang. Michael's name flashed on the screen, and for a moment I felt a surge of hope. Maybe he was calling to explain everything, to tell me there had been a terrible mistake, to make this all make sense again. "Hey sis?" His voice was bright and cheerful, the same tone he'd used when we were kids, and he was trying to talk his way out of trouble. "What are you up to today?" "Actually," I said, my voice steady despite the fact that my hands were trembling, "I'm sitting outside your new house." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear birds chirping in the background, the sound of a lawnmower somewhere in the distance, but nothing from Michael's end of the line. "Andrea?" he finally said, and all the cheerfulness had drained out of his voice. "We need to talk." "Yes," I said, "we really do." 20 minutes later, we were sitting in his living room, my living room, according to the mortgage documents burning a hole in my purse, and the uncomfortable silence stretched between us like a chasm. The blonde woman, who had introduced herself as Jessica with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, had disappeared into what I assumed was the kitchen, though I could hear her moving around upstairs. The house was everything the listing photos had promised and more. The furniture looked like it had been professionally selected, all clean lines and neutral colors that probably had names like Whisper Gray and Autumn Sage. The kitchen island was bigger than my entire living room, and through the sliding glass doors I could see the pool sparkling in the afternoon sun. "It's beautiful," I said finally because someone had to break the silence. "I can see why you wanted it so badly." Michael ran his hands through his hair, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. "Andrea, I can explain." "I hope so," I said, pulling the mortgage documents from my purse and spreading them on his coffee table that I was apparently paying for. "Because right now, according to First National Bank, I own this house. I also apparently own a business I've never heard of and have an income that's somehow tripled overnight. It's been a very interesting day." He stared at the papers like they might catch fire if he looked at them long enough. "I was going to tell you." "When? At the housewarming party?" His head snapped up. "How did you know about that?" "Lucky guess, when is it?" "This weekend," he said quietly. "Saturday night." We were going to invite the whole family, all our friends. I wanted to celebrate properly, you know? I've worked so hard for this. The anger that had been building in my chest all day finally boiled over. You've worked hard? Michael, you stole my identity. You committed fraud. You could go to prison, and you could take me down with you. It's not like that, he said, standing up and starting to pace. I didn't steal anything. I borrowed your credit. I'm gonna pay it all back, every penny. I just needed a way to get approved for the mortgage, and my credit is shot from that whole thing with the business loan that went bad 2 years ago. So you decided to destroy mine instead? I'm not destroying anything. Look, I've got everything figured out. Chen Digital Solutions is a real company. I've been building the client base for months. The contracts I have lined up will more than cover the mortgage payments. In 5 years, this house will be worth over $1 million. We'll sell it, split the profit, and you'll make more money than you ever could working at that marketing firm. I stared at him, genuinely speechless. You think this is a business partnership? Why not? We're family. We've always looked out for each other. Looking out for each other doesn't involve identity theft, Michael. It doesn't involve forging signatures and creating fake businesses. The business isn't fake, he insisted. I really am doing digital marketing consulting. The income projections might be a little optimistic, but they're based on real potential. A little optimistic? Michael, according to these documents, I'm making $180,000 a year. That's more than 3 times what I actually make. That's not optimistic, that's fraudulent. Jessica appeared at the top of the stairs, moving with the careful quiet of someone who'd been listening to the entire conversation. Maybe I should give you two some privacy, she said, but she made no move to actually leave. No, stay, Michael said quickly. Andrea, this is Jessica. She's my business partner. She's been helping me set everything up. Business partner. I looked at Jessica with new eyes, taking in her designer handbag, her perfectly manicured nails, the expensive highlights in her hair. What kind of business partner? I handle the marketing and client relations, Jessica said smoothly. Michael is brilliant with the creative side, but he needed someone with business experience to help structure everything properly. And that structuring included stealing my identity? Jessica's smile faltered slightly. We prefer to think of it as creative financing. The audacity of it was breathtaking. They weren't just unapologetic. They seemed genuinely confused about why I was upset. Like I was being unreasonable for objecting to having my entire financial life hijacked for their entrepreneurial venture. I want my name off everything, I said, standing up. The mortgage, the business registration, all of it. I want this fixed, and I want it fixed now. It's not that simple, Michael said. The mortgage is a 30-year commitment. You can't just take your name off it without refinancing the entire loan, and I can't qualify for refinancing with my credit score. Then you'll have to sell the house. Andrea, be reasonable. We just moved in 3 weeks ago. If we sell now, we'll lose money on closing costs and realtor fees. Just give me 6 months to get the business established. 6 months to prove this can work. 6 months where I'm legally responsible for a $750,000 mortgage on a house I don't live in? 6 months where my credit is tied to a business I have no control over? Absolutely not. Michael's expression hardened, and for a moment I saw a side of him I'd never seen before. You're not thinking this through. If you report this as fraud, I'll be arrested. Do you really want to destroy my life over money? You destroyed my financial life for money. I'm trying to build something here. I'm trying to create a future for both of us. A future built on lies and fraud. Everything is lies and fraud if you look at it that way, he snapped. Do you think any successful person got there by following every single rule? Do you think mom and dad bought their house by playing it completely safe? Sometimes you have to take risks. With your own credit, with your own money, not with someone else's identity. Jessica cleared her throat delicately. Perhaps we all need to take a step back and think about this rationally. Getting emotional isn't going to solve anything. I turned to look at her, this stranger, who was living in a house that was legally mine, wearing clothes that were probably paid for with credit cards in my name. How long have you known? Known what? That Michael was using my identity to buy this house. She glanced at Michael, and something passed between them. I knew he had a business partner, she said carefully. That's not what I asked. Another look passed between them, and I realized that Jessica knew everything. She'd known from the beginning that Michael was committing fraud, and she'd helped him do it. The business partner story was just a cover for what was essentially a criminal conspiracy. I think I should go, I said, gathering up the mortgage documents. But this isn't over. I'm going to fix this, one way or another. Andrea, wait, Michael called as I headed toward the door. Don't do anything stupid. Think about what you're really willing to sacrifice here. I stopped with my hand on the doorknob. What's that supposed to mean? I mean that families are more important than money. I mean that if you push this too far, there might not be any coming back from it. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Report the fraud, and lose my brother forever. Let him get away with it, and lose my financial future. Either way, I was going to lose something important. I'll think about it, I said, which was the most honest thing I could offer. But as I drove home, I already knew what I had to do. This wasn't just about money, or credit scores, or mortgage payments. This was about Michael believing he had the right to make decisions about my life without my consent. This was about him looking me in the eye and trying to convince me that identity theft was actually a favor he was doing for me. This was about the fact that my own brother had stolen my identity and was now living in luxury while I was facing potential financial ruin. I had to report it, even if it meant losing my family, even if it meant Michael going to prison. Because the alternative was letting him get away with it, and that would mean losing myself. When I got home, Rachel was waiting with a bottle of wine and a concerned expression. Okay, she said before I'd even closed the door behind me. Tell me everything. So I did. I told her about the frozen credit card, about the mortgage I'd never applied for, about the house and the girlfriend and the business that might or might not be real. I told her about Michael's casual attitude toward fraud and Jessica's smug dismissal of my concerns. Holy shit, Rachel said when I finished. Your brother is either completely delusional or a criminal mastermind. I'm starting to think it might be both. So what are you going to do? I'm going to report it, I said, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. I'm going to file a police report and let the chips fall where they fall. Even if it means Michael gets arrested. Especially if it means Michael gets arrested. He's counting on me not following through, because we're family. He's counting on me to just roll over and let him destroy my credit because it's easier than dealing with the consequences. Rachel poured us both another glass of wine. For what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. Family doesn't give you the right to commit crimes against each other. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Michael and I had always been close, but looking back, I could see patterns I'd ignored. The way he'd always been quick to borrow money but slow to pay it back. The way he'd always had grand schemes that never quite worked out. The way he'd always seemed to believe that rules were suggestions that didn't really apply to him. I'd chalked it up to him being a dreamer, an optimist, someone who thought outside the box. But maybe what I'd been seeing all along was someone who didn't respect boundaries, who didn't understand that other people's resources weren't his to use as he saw fit. Maybe I'd been enabling him for years without realizing it. Tomorrow I would go to the police station. Tomorrow I would file a report that would probably destroy my relationship with my brother forever. Tomorrow I would start the long process of untangling my financial life from his fraud. But tonight I was just a woman who discovered that the person she trusted most in the world had betrayed that trust in the most fundamental way possible. And tomorrow everything would change. What I didn't know then was just how dramatically everything was about to change. What I didn't know was that Michael's housewarming party was going to be interrupted by federal agents. What I didn't know was that my brother's identity theft was just the beginning of a much larger and more dangerous scheme. But that's a story for tomorrow. The Phoenix Police Department's fraud division occupied a cramped corner of the third floor, where Detective Maria Santos sat behind a desk covered in case files and empty coffee cups. She looked to be in her 40s, with tired eyes that had probably seen every variation of human greed and stupidity that existed. When I explained my situation, she listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. Identity theft by family members is more common than people think, she said when I finished. It's also more complicated to prosecute because there's often some level of consent or shared access to personal information. Your brother knowing your social security number, your mother's maiden name, having access to your mail at some point. These things make it harder to prove criminal intent versus family financial arrangements gone wrong. I slid the mortgage documents across her desk. There was no financial arrangement. I had no idea any of this was happening until my credit card was declined yesterday. Detective Santos examined the papers carefully, her eyebrows rising as she took in the loan amount. This is a substantial fraud. Have you spoken to your brother about this directly? Yesterday. He claims it's a business partnership and that he's going to pay everything back. He actually seemed surprised that I was upset about it. That's not uncommon. Family fraudsters often convince themselves they're helping or that they have some right to use their relative's credit. It's a form of rationalization. She pulled out a digital recorder. I'd like to get your full statement on record, and then we'll need to start building a paper trail. This isn't just a local matter. Mortgage fraud involving amounts this large typically gets federal attention. Federal attention. The words sent a chill through me. This wasn't just about my brother anymore. This was about the FBI, federal prosecutors, prison sentences that could span decades. Part of me wanted to take back everything I'd said, to go home and pretend none of this was happening. But then I thought about Michael living in that house, spinning around his girlfriend like he was celebrating his own cleverness, and the anger returned. He'd made this choice when he decided to steal my identity. Now he'd have to live with the consequences. The statement took 2 hours. Detective Santos was thorough, asking about every detail of my relationship with Michael, every time he'd had access to my personal information, every conversation we'd had about money or real estate. She was particularly interested in the timeline, when Michael had started talking about buying a house, when I'd last checked my credit report, when I'd first noticed any unusual activity on my accounts. We'll need to coordinate with the bank's fraud investigation, she said when we finished. I'll also be reaching out to federal authorities. Cases involving mortgage fraud at this level usually get picked up by the FBI's white-collar crime unit. How long does something like this take to resolve? That depends on a lot of factors. Your brother's cooperation, whether there are other victims, how sophisticated the fraud operation is. Could be months. Could be years. Years. The thought of living with this hanging over my head for years was overwhelming. What happens to me in the meantime? The mortgage is in my name. What if he stops making payments? That's the complicated part. Until this gets sorted out legally, you're technically responsible for that debt. I'd recommend getting a lawyer who specializes in identity theft cases. They can help you navigate the civil side while we handle the criminal investigation. I left the police station with a case number, a stack of forms to fill out, and the heavy knowledge that I'd just set in motion a process that would probably destroy my family. My phone had been buzzing with missed calls and texts all morning, 3 from my mother, 2 from my father, and 7 from Michael. I didn't read the texts or listen to the voicemails. I wasn't ready for whatever manipulation or guilt trip they contained. Instead, I drove to the office of Jonathan Hayes, the attorney Detective Santos had recommended. His practice specialized in financial crimes and identity theft, and his receptionist was able to squeeze me in for a consultation that afternoon. Jonathan Hayes looked exactly like Central Casting would order for competent lawyer, gray hair, expensive suit, handshake that conveyed both confidence and sympathy. His office walls were covered with diplomas and certificates, along with photos of him shaking hands with various politicians and judges. I've handled dozens of family identity theft cases, he said after I'd explained the situation. The good news is that you acted quickly and you have clear documentation of the fraud. The bad news is that unraveling this kind of financial entanglement can be extremely complex, especially when property is involved. What do you mean? Your brother can't just take your name off the mortgage without refinancing the entire loan. Banks don't allow that, because it would leave them with insufficient collateral if the borrower defaults. So either your brother qualifies for a new loan on his own, which sounds unlikely given his credit history, or the house has to be sold. And if he refuses to sell, then you'd have to force the sale through the courts, which could take months or even years. In the meantime, you're legally responsible for those mortgage payments. If your brother stops paying, it's your credit that gets destroyed. The irony wasn't lost on me. Michael had stolen my identity to buy his dream house, And now I was trapped in a financial nightmare that could follow me for decades. Is there any way to get my name removed without his cooperation? It's possible, but it would require proving to the bank's satisfaction that you were a victim of fraud and had no knowledge of or participation in the mortgage application. Given that your brother is your sibling and had access to your personal information, that could be challenging. But the police report should prove that, right? It helps, but banks are conservative institutions. They're going to want to see a criminal conviction before they're willing to absorb the financial loss of removing you from the mortgage. And even then, they might pursue other remedies. I felt like I was drowning in legal complexities and worst-case scenarios. So what do you recommend? We start by documenting everything. I'll need copies of all the fraudulent documents, communications with your brother, bank records, anything that establishes a timeline and your lack of knowledge about these transactions. Then we'll work with the criminal investigation to build the strongest possible case. And how much is this going to cost me? Jonathan's expression grew sympathetic. Identity theft defense can be expensive, especially in complex cases like this. My retainer is $10,000, and depending on how long this drags out, total costs could reach $50,000 or more. $50,000. To defend myself against crimes my own brother had committed. The financial devastation was expanding beyond the mortgage fraud. Now I was looking at legal fees that could bankrupt me even if I won. That evening, I finally listened to my voicemails. My mother's voice was strained with worry. Andrea, honey, Michael told us there's been some kind of misunderstanding about a loan application. Can you please call me? I'm sure we can work this out as a family. My father was more direct. Your brother says you're threatening to have him arrested over a business arrangement. I don't know what's going on, but this family doesn't solve problems by calling the police on each other. Call me back. Michael's messages grew increasingly frantic. The first was conciliatory. Sis, I know you're upset, but let's talk about this like adults. There has to be a solution that works for everyone. By the seventh message, his tone had shifted. Andrea, I don't know what you think you're accomplishing here, but you're making a huge mistake. Do you have any idea what happens to families when someone goes to prison? Do you want to be responsible for destroying everything? I was sitting on my couch, staring at my phone and trying to decide whether to call my parents back, when Rachel came home from work. She took one look at my face and headed straight for the wine rack. How bad? She asked, pouring 2 generous glasses. Worse than I thought. The lawyer says I could be stuck with the mortgage payments even if Michael gets convicted. And legal fees could hit $50,000. Jesus, can you afford that? Not even close. I'd have to drain my savings, max out my credit cards, maybe take out loans against my 401k. I'd be financially ruined even if I win. Rachel sat down beside me, her expression serious. Andrea, I have to ask, are you sure you want to go through with this? I mean, I get why you're angry, but if fighting it is going to destroy you financially, you think I should just let him get away with it? I think you should consider all your options. Maybe there's a way to work something out without involving the police. Maybe Michael really can pay back the money. I'd been expecting support from Rachel, not doubt. You think I'm overreacting? I think you're in an impossible situation, and I'm worried about you. Michael's definitely wrong, but if pursuing justice is going to bankrupt you, maybe justice isn't worth it. So he wins? He gets to keep the house, and I get to keep the debt? Maybe you both lose a little, instead of you losing everything. I understood Rachel's logic, but the idea of backing down felt like surrendering to blackmail. Michael was counting on exactly this, that the cost of fighting back would be higher than the cost of giving in. It was a calculated gamble that his victim would choose financial survival over justice. The next morning brought a new development. I was getting ready for work when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Ms. Chen? This is Agent Thompson with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. I understand you filed a complaint regarding mortgage fraud involving your brother. My heart started racing. Yes, that's right. I'd like to meet with you this afternoon to discuss the case. We've been investigating some irregularities in mortgage applications in the Phoenix area, and your brother's name has come up in our investigation. You've been investigating Michael? I can't discuss the details over the phone, but yes, your brother and his business partner, Jessica Martinez, are persons of interest in a larger fraud investigation. Your complaint may be connected to other criminal activity we're looking into. Jessica Martinez. I realized I'd never learned Jessica's last name during our confrontation at the house. Now I had a name, and apparently the FBI had been watching her. What kind of other criminal activity? Again, I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Can you meet me at the Federal Building at 2 p.m. today? I called in sick to work again, which was becoming a pattern. My supervisor was understanding but clearly concerned about my recent absences. I couldn't tell her that my brother had stolen my identity and I was now part of an FBI investigation. It sounded too crazy to be believed. The Federal Building in downtown Phoenix was all concrete and glass, designed to intimidate. Agent Thompson met me in the lobby, a serious woman in her 30s, with short brown hair and a handshake that could crack walnuts. She led me through security checkpoints and up to a conference room that looked like something from a crime drama. "Thank you for coming in," she said, settling across from me at a long table. "Before we begin, I want to make it clear that you're not under investigation. You're a victim and potentially a witness in a criminal case we've been building. A case against Michael, against your brother Jessica Martinez, and potentially several other individuals involved in a mortgage fraud scheme. Your complaint was actually the missing piece we needed to establish the scope of their operation." Agent Thompson opened a thick file and spread out documents across the table. I recognized some of them. Copies of the mortgage application and business registration for Chen Digital Solutions. But there were others I'd never seen before. Jessica Martinez has been running sophisticated identity theft schemes for over 2 years. Agent Thompson explained. She targets individuals with good credit scores and uses their identities to purchase high-value properties. The properties are then flipped quickly or used as collateral for additional loans. And Michael? Your brother appears to be her latest partner, though we're not sure yet whether he's a willing conspirator or another victim. The business he thinks he's running, Chen Digital Solutions, doesn't actually have any legitimate clients. The contracts and income projections he showed you are fabricated. The room seemed to spin around me. So the whole thing is fake? The business, the income, the projected profits, all of it. Jessica has been using this model to recruit partners who can provide clean identities for her fraud schemes. She promises them wealth and success, but they're actually just fronts for her criminal operation. But Michael signed the documents. He had to know he was committing fraud. That's what we're trying to determine. Jessica is very good at manipulation. She finds people who are vulnerable, financially desperate, eager for success, trusting of authority figures. She gradually involves them in illegal activities while convincing them they're legitimate business practices. I thought about Michael's certainty that everything would work out, his confidence in the business projections, his genuine surprise at my anger. Maybe he really didn't understand the full scope of what he was involved in. How many other victims are there? At least 6 that we've identified so far. Possibly more. Jessica has stolen millions of dollars using this method. Your case is significant because it's the first time we've had a victim come forward before the scheme collapsed completely. What happens now? We're preparing to make arrests. Jessica and your brother will likely be taken into custody within the next few days. We're coordinating with local authorities to ensure we can gather all the evidence before they have a chance to destroy documents or flee. Will Michael go to prison? Agent Thompson's expression softened slightly. That depends on many factors. His level of cooperation, whether he can provide evidence against Jessica, whether he's willing to testify. First-time offenders who cooperate sometimes receive reduced sentences, especially if they can help us recover stolen assets. And what about the house? What about my mortgage? That's part of what makes your case so important. If we can prove the entire transaction was based on fraud, the bank may be willing to void the mortgage entirely. You'd be off the hook financially, though it could take months to sort out. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe I wouldn't be trapped in Michael's debt forever. Maybe there was a way out that didn't involve years of legal battles and financial ruin. What do you need from me? Continued cooperation. We may need you to wear a wire in conversations with your brother. Help us document his admissions about the fraud. We'll also need you to testify when this goes to trial. The idea of wearing a wire to record my own brother was disturbing, but I'd already crossed the line by filing the police report. There was no going back now. When do you expect to make the arrests? Soon. Within a week, possibly sooner. Jessica has been getting nervous lately. We think she knows we're closing in. She's been making plans to leave the country, which is why we need to move quickly. As I left the federal building, my phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Family dinner Sunday at Mom and Dad's. They want to talk through this whole misunderstanding. Please come. We can fix this. The word misunderstanding made my blood boil. Even now, with FBI agents preparing arrest warrants, Michael was still minimizing what he'd done. He was still treating identity theft and mortgage fraud like a family squabble that could be resolved over pot roast and mashed potatoes. But maybe the family dinner was exactly what I needed. If Agent Thompson wanted me to gather evidence of Michael's admissions, Sunday dinner might be the perfect opportunity. My parents would pressure him to tell the truth, and maybe I could get him to explain exactly what he'd done and why. I texted back, "I'll be there." What I didn't tell him was that I might not be coming alone. Agent Thompson had mentioned the possibility of wearing a wire, and Sunday dinner with the whole family present might be the ideal time to gather the evidence they needed. I was about to become a federal informant against my own brother. 3 weeks ago, Michael had been my closest confidant, the person I called when I needed advice or support. Now I was going to help the FB. I built a case against him. The transformation felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold. But Michael had made his choice when he stole my identity. Now I was making mine. Sunday dinner was going to be very interesting. The rest of the week passed in a haze of phone calls with lawyers, meetings with bank representatives, and increasingly frantic messages from my family. My mother called twice a day, begging me to reconsider whatever action I was taking against Michael. My father left voicemails that grew progressively more angry, accusing me of betraying family loyalty and threatening to destroy Michael's future over money. The irony was overwhelming. They were angry at me for reporting crimes that Michael had committed against me. They wanted me to protect the person who had stolen my identity and potentially ruined my financial future. Family loyalty apparently only ran in one direction. Friday afternoon, Agent Thompson called with an update. "We've scheduled the arrests for Monday morning. We'll hit Jessica's residence and your brother's house simultaneously to prevent them from coordinating their stories or destroying evidence." Monday morning. That's after the family dinner. "Yes, we want to give you one more chance to gather evidence if you're willing. The recording device is very small, completely undetectable. Your family won't know you're wearing it. And if I can get Michael to admit to the fraud on tape, it would significantly strengthen our case. Right now, we have documentation that proves the fraud occurred, but we need evidence of intent. If Michael admits he knew he was using your identity without permission, that establishes criminal intent beyond any reasonable doubt." I agreed to wear the wire. The decision felt like stepping off a cliff, but I'd already committed to this path. There was no point in backing down now. Saturday night, I barely slept. Rachel had offered to come with me to the family dinner for moral support, but I'd declined. This was something I needed to face alone. Besides, having a witness might make my family more guarded in their conversations. Sunday morning, I met Agent Thompson in a parking lot near my parents' house. The recording device was smaller than I'd expected. A tiny microphone that clipped inside my bra, connected to a recording unit about the size of a smartphone that fit in my purse. "Just act natural," Agent Thompson advised. "Don't push too hard for admissions. Let the conversation flow naturally and see what comes up. What if they don't talk about the fraud? Then, we proceed with the case we have." But families under stress tend to have very revealing conversations. Your parents are going to want to understand what happened, and Michael's going to want to justify his actions. Just listen and respond honestly. As I drove to my parents' house, I wondered if this would be the last normal interaction I'd ever have with my family. After Monday's arrests, everything would change. Michael would know I'd cooperated with the FBI, My parents would know I'd chosen justice over family loyalty. There might not be any coming back from this. But as I pulled into the driveway and saw Michael's new BMW parked next to my father's truck, I reminded myself why I was doing this. He was still driving cars and living in houses paid for with my stolen identity. He was still treating this like a game he could win through charm and manipulation. It was time for the game to end. The house smelled like my mother's famous lasagna, a comfort food that had marked every important family gathering for as long as I could remember. Under normal circumstances, the familiar aroma would have filled me with warmth and nostalgia. Today, it just reminded me of everything I was about to lose. My parents greeted me with nervous hugs, their eyes searching my face for signs of anger or forgiveness. Michael was already at the dining room table, looking uncharacteristically serious in a button-down shirt that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. "Andrea," my mother said, her voice carefully controlled. "I'm so glad you came. We need to talk about this situation and figure out how to move forward as a family." "What situation would that be, Mom?" Michael shifted uncomfortably. "Come on, don't be like that. You know why we're here." "I know why I'm here. I'm curious about why you think we're here." My father sat down heavily, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "Your brother made a mistake, Andrea. A big mistake. But families stick together. We find solutions that work for everyone." "What kind of solution did you have in mind?" The conversation continued for an hour, with my parents trying to mediate while Michael grew increasingly defensive. He admitted to using my information for the mortgage application, but insisted it wasn't really fraud since he intended to pay everything back. He claimed the business was legitimate and would generate enough income to cover all the payments. Then Jessica arrived. I hadn't expected her to be included in the family discussion, but Michael introduced her as his business partner and girlfriend, someone who had a stake in finding a resolution. She sat beside him, perfectly composed, offering solutions that sounded reasonable on the surface but fell apart under scrutiny. The simplest thing would be for Andrea to become an official partner in Chen Digital Solutions, Jessica suggested. She'd have legal ownership stake in the business, which would legitimize her name being on the mortgage. Everyone wins. "Except I don't want to be in business with people who commit fraud," I said. "It's not fraud if you consent retroactively," Jessica replied smoothly. "We can file amended paperwork showing that you were always intended to be a partner. The business is generating real revenue now, so there's actual value in the partnership." The recording device felt heavy against my chest. Everything Jessica said was digging her deeper into criminal liability. She was proposing to cover up one fraud by committing additional fraud, falsifying business documents to create retroactive consent. "What revenue?" I asked. "Michael, you told me the business was just getting started." "It is, but we've got several major contracts lined up." "Tell her about the Morrison account, Jess." Jessica launched into a detailed description of a digital marketing contract with a resort development company worth $200,000 annually. The projections were impressive, the client testimonials were glowing, and the future looked bright. None of it was real. According to Agent Thompson, the business had no legitimate clients at all. Jessica was describing a complete fantasy, and Michael was either lying along with her or completely deluded about the nature of their partnership. "That sounds amazing," I said. "Can I see the contracts?" "They're confidential," Jessica said quickly. "Client privacy requirements. But I can show you the bank deposits from our first milestone payments." "I'd like to see those." Michael looked nervous. "Andrea, what's with the third degree?" "I thought we were here to work things out, not conduct an audit. I just want to understand what I'm being asked to become part of. If I'm going to be legally responsible for this mortgage, I need to know the business can actually support it." The conversation grew tenser as I continued asking questions Jessica couldn't answer, and Michael couldn't explain. My parents tried to steer things back toward family harmony, but the fundamental issues remained unresolved. How could I trust people who had already lied to me? How could I become partners with someone who had stolen my identity? Finally, my father's patience snapped. "Enough! Andrea, your brother made a mistake. He's admitted that. He's trying to make it right. What more do you want?" I want him to understand that what he did was a crime. I want him to take responsibility for the consequences instead of asking me to fix them. It's not a crime between family members, Michael said. It's a misunderstanding. Using someone's identity without permission is identity theft. Falsifying income information on a mortgage application is bank fraud. These are federal crimes, Michael. Are you threatening me? I'm stating facts. Jessica stood up abruptly. I think this conversation has run its course. Michael, we should go. Wait, my mother said. We haven't finished talking about solutions. There are no solutions that work for everyone, I said. Michael has to choose between keeping the house and staying out of prison. I have to choose between protecting my family and protecting my future. Jessica has to choose between running her fraud scheme and facing the consequences. The room went silent. Jessica's composure cracked for the first time, her eyes flashing with something that might have been panic or rage. What fraud scheme? My father asked. Ask Jessica about her other business partners. Ask her about the other identities she's used to buy properties. Ask her how many people she's stolen from. You don't know what you're talking about, Jessica said, but her voice was strained. I know more than you think. Michael looked back and forth between Jessica and me, confusion and dawning realization playing across his face. What is she talking about, Jess? She's trying to cause trouble because she's jealous of our success. I'm trying to save him from going to prison as your accomplice. The accusation hung in the air like a bomb. My parents stared at Jessica with new suspicion, while Michael's face went pale. Prison? He whispered. Identity theft and mortgage fraud are federal crimes, Michael. Jessica isn't just your business partner. She's a career criminal who's been using your relationship to commit fraud. You're not building a business together. You're helping her steal money. Jessica moved toward the door. I don't have to listen to this. No, I said, you don't. But tomorrow you might not have a choice about who you listen to. She stopped, turning back with eyes that now held unmistakable fear. What's that supposed to mean? It means that some conversations aren't optional. Jessica left without another word, Michael following her after a confused look at the rest of us. Through the window, I could see them arguing in the driveway, their voices raised but their words indistinct. My parents sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they'd just heard. Is it true? My mother asked finally. Is Michael really in that much trouble? Yes, I said simply. It's true. The recording device had captured everything. Michael's admissions about using my identity, Jessica's attempts to cover up the fraud with additional crimes, their discussion of fake business contracts and non-existent revenue. It was more than enough to establish criminal intent and conspiracy. As I drove home that evening, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that the truth was finally out in the open, that I'd gathered the evidence the FBI needed to build their case. Sadness that my family might never forgive me for choosing justice over loyalty. But I'd made my choice. Tomorrow, Agent Thompson would have everything she needed to arrest Michael and Jessica. Tomorrow, the consequences of their choices would finally catch up with them. Tomorrow, my brother's dream house would become his nightmare. Monday morning arrived with the kind of blazing Arizona sunshine that made everything look deceptively peaceful. I was at my desk at Morrison Marketing, pretending to review campaign proposals while actually watching the clock and wondering if federal agents were already surrounding Michael's house. Agent Thompson had said the arrests would happen first thing in the morning, coordinated precisely to catch both Michael and Jessica before they could communicate or flee. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Change of plans. Emergency meeting at the house. Come now, M. I stared at the message, my heart racing. This wasn't part of the plan. Michael wasn't supposed to know anything was happening until the agents knocked on his door. Either something had gone wrong with the timing, or Michael had somehow gotten wind of the investigation. I called Agent Thompson immediately. I just got a text from Michael asking me to come to the house for an emergency meeting. Something's not right. We're 15 minutes out from executing the warrants, she said, her voice tense. Don't go to that house, Andrea. If they know we're coming, they might be desperate enough to do something dangerous. But what if he's genuinely trying to work something out? What if he wants to confess or cooperate? It's too risky. Stay where you are until we have them in custody. But as I sat at my desk, another text arrived. Andrea, please. I know you're angry, but I need to show you something that changes everything. Jessica's been lying to both of us. I have proof now. The message felt different from Michael's usual attempts at manipulation. There was something raw and urgent about it that made me think he might have genuinely discovered something about Jessica's true nature. If he was finally ready to turn against her, if he had evidence that could help the FBI's case, maybe this was worth the risk. Against Agent Thompson's explicit instructions, I told my supervisor I had a family emergency and drove towards Scottsdale. I called the agent on the way to let her know what I was doing, but the call went straight to voicemail. They were probably already in position, preparing for the arrests. The closer I got to Desert Vista Drive, the more my anxiety spiked. Something felt wrong about the whole situation. The street was too quiet, too empty for a Monday morning in an upscale neighborhood. Michael's BMW was in the driveway, but Jessica's car was nowhere to be seen. I parked across the street and sat for a moment, studying the house. The curtains were drawn tight, which was unusual for Michael. He'd always preferred natural light, often joking that dark rooms were for people with dark secrets. The front door was slightly ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry. My phone rang, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was Michael. "Are you here?" he asked without preamble. "I'm outside." "Michael, what's going on? Why did you need me to come so urgently?" "Jessica's gone. She left this morning before I woke up and she took everything. All the business files, all the contracts, even the money from our joint account. When I tried to call her, her phone was disconnected." "Michael, listen to me carefully. You need to get out of that house right now. The FBI is coming to arrest both of you this morning." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "What did you say?" "I reported the identity theft to the police. They brought in federal agents because Jessica's been running a large-scale fraud operation. She's used your relationship to commit crimes, and now you're both facing federal charges." "You called the FBI on me?" "I called the police on identity theft. The FBI got involved because Jessica has been doing this to multiple people for years. Michael, you're in serious trouble, but it might not be too late to help yourself if you cooperate." "I can't believe you did this. I can't believe my own sister would destroy my life like this." "I didn't destroy your life. You destroyed it when you stole my identity. I was trying to build something. I was trying to create a future for both of us. You were being used by a criminal, and now you're going to pay the price for it." Through the phone, I could hear sounds in the background. Car doors slamming, voices shouting commands. The FBI had arrived. "Michael, they're there. Come out with your hands visible and don't do anything stupid." The line went dead. From my position across the street, I could see federal agents positioning themselves around the house. They wore bulletproof vests marked with FBI in large yellow letters, and they moved with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this many times before. Agent Thompson was among them, speaking into a radio and gesturing toward different positions around the property. A voice boomed through a megaphone. "Michael Chen, this is the FBI. We have a warrant for your arrest. Exit the house with your hands visible, and no sudden movements." Nothing happened for several long minutes. The agents waited, maintaining their positions while the megaphone announcement repeated. I found myself holding my breath, praying that Michael would be smart enough to surrender peacefully. Then the front door opened, and Michael stepped onto the porch. Even from a distance, I could see that he looked terrible. Unshaven, wearing rumpled clothes that looked like he'd slept in them. His hands were raised, but his posture spoke of defeat rather than compliance. Two agents approached him, while others maintained their positions. They moved slowly, professionally, treating him like he might be dangerous. Despite his obvious surrender, Michael offered no resistance as they handcuffed him and led him toward one of the black SUVs parked at the curb. As they passed under a streetlight, Michael looked directly at me. Our eyes met across the distance, and I saw something I'd never seen in his face before: pure hatred. Not disappointment, not betrayal, not even anger. Hatred. In that moment, he wasn't my big brother anymore. He was a stranger who blamed me for the consequences of his own choices. The agents loaded him into the SUV and drove away, leaving behind a scene that looked like something from a television crime drama. Yellow tape cordoned off the house while a forensics team began the process of collecting evidence. Agent Thompson spotted me and walked over, her expression unreadable. "I told you not to come here," she said. "I know, I'm sorry." But Michael called and said Jessica had disappeared. I thought he might be ready to cooperate. Jessica Martinez was arrested at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport 2 hours ago. She was trying to board a flight to Mexico with a suitcase full of cash and fake identification documents. Your brother was lying to you. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Even at the end, even when facing federal charges, Michael had been trying to manipulate me. The story about Jessica leaving, about him discovering her true nature, about having proof of her deception, all of it had been lies designed to get me to the house. Why did he want me here? We're not sure yet. The house was wired with recording equipment, suggesting he might have been trying to get you to say something incriminating on tape. Or maybe he was planning something more desperate. Desperate how? Agent Thompson's expression grew serious. We found weapons in the house, Andrea. Your brother had a handgun and enough ammunition to suggest he might have been planning to go out fighting. If you'd gone inside when he asked, you might have become a hostage situation. The thought that Michael might have been willing to use me as a human shield was almost incomprehensible. This was the same person who'd taught me to drive, who'd scared away boys who treated me badly, who'd always claimed that family was the most important thing in the world. What happens now? Your brother and Jessica Martinez will be formally charged with multiple counts of identity theft, mortgage fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. Given the scope of their crimes and Jessica's flight risk, they'll likely be held without bail pending trial. And the house? That's more complicated. The bank will probably foreclose on the property, but getting your name removed from the mortgage will still require legal proceedings. The good news is that we've documented enough evidence to prove you were a victim, which should expedite the process. As the forensics team continued their work, neighbors began emerging from their houses to gawk at the scene. I realized I was probably going to be identified as Michael's sister, the family member who'd turned him in to federal authorities. In a community where family loyalty was sacred, I'd be labeled as a traitor. But watching the evidence bags pile up as agents removed documents, computers, and financial records from the house, I knew I'd made the right choice. Whatever Michael had been planning for me in that house, it wouldn't have ended well. Jessica's influence had corrupted him completely, turning him into someone capable of violence against his own family. My phone buzzed with a call from my mother. I let it go to voicemail, not ready to hear her reaction to Michael's arrest. The voicemail notification appeared a few minutes later, and against my better judgment I listened to it. "Andrea." My mother's voice was thick with tears. "The FBI just called. They said Michael's been arrested and that you were the one who reported him. Please tell me this isn't true. Please tell me you didn't destroy your own brother's life." The pain in her voice was devastating. She still didn't understand that Michael had destroyed his own life through his choices. She still saw me as the aggressor, the one who'd brought law enforcement into a family matter that should have been resolved privately. Agent Thompson noticed my distress. Family reactions are always difficult in cases like this. They'll need time to process everything they've learned about your brother's activities. The evidence we've collected will help them understand that you didn't have a choice. What kind of evidence? Financial records showing the full scope of Jessica's fraud operation. Your brother was involved in at least 6 different identity theft cases, not just yours. He helped Jessica steal over $2 million from innocent victims. $2 million. The number was staggering. Michael hadn't just stolen my identity for one house purchase. He'd been systematically participating in a criminal enterprise that had devastated multiple families. The man I'd grown up with, the brother I'd trusted and defended, had become a career criminal. Did he know about the other victims? The evidence suggests he did. We found detailed files on all of Jessica's targets, including credit reports, personal information, and financial profiles. Your brother helped select the victims based on their creditworthiness and likelihood of not discovering the fraud quickly. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd thought possible. Michael hadn't just stolen my identity out of desperation or misguided family loyalty. He'd coldly evaluated my credit score and personal circumstances to determine that I was a suitable target for criminal exploitation. I was nothing more than a mark to him, a resource to be exploited for financial gain. As I drove home that afternoon, I thought about all the signs I'd missed or explained away. Michael's sudden confidence about his financial future, his evasiveness about the details of his business ventures, his anger when I'd asked too many questions about Jessica and their partnership, the expensive clothes and cars that had appeared overnight. I'd wanted to believe in his success because I loved him. I'd ignored red flags because acknowledging them would have meant accepting that my brother was capable of serious crimes. Even when the evidence was overwhelming, part of me had hoped there was an innocent explanation. But there was no innocent explanation for helping a criminal steal $2 million from innocent families. There was no innocent explanation for planning to use your own sister as a hostage when the law finally caught up with you. The brother I'd grown up with was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize and couldn't trust. The family dinners, the shared memories, the inside jokes and childhood bonds, all of it felt tainted now by the knowledge of what he'd become. That evening, Rachel found me sitting on our couch, staring at the television without really seeing it. She'd heard about the arrests on the news and had come home early from work to check on me. "How are you holding up?" she asked, settling beside me with 2 cups of tea. "I don't know. I keep thinking about who Michael used to be versus who he became. I keep wondering if I ever really knew him at all. People change, especially when they get involved with the wrong crowd." Jessica manipulated him, but at some point, he made his own choices about what he was willing to do. He had files on all the victims, Rachel. He helped choose people to steal from based on their credit scores and personal circumstances. That's not manipulation. That's calculated criminal behavior. And you stopped him. You prevented him from hurting more people. My family doesn't see it that way. My mother left a voicemail calling me a traitor. My father hasn't spoken to me since yesterday's dinner. They think I chose outsiders over family. You chose justice over enabling criminal behavior. There's a difference. I wanted to believe Rachel was right, but the guilt was overwhelming. Michael was going to prison because of evidence I'd provided. My parents were devastated because their son was facing decades behind bars. Our family was destroyed because I'd chosen to report crimes instead of covering them up. "Do you think I made the right choice?" I asked. "Do you think you had any other choice?" The question hung between us. What would have happened if I'd stayed silent? If I'd allowed Michael to keep the house and continue his partnership with Jessica? How many more families would have been destroyed by their fraud scheme? How many more innocent people would have lost their savings, their credit, their financial futures? My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Agent Thompson's name appeared on the screen. "Ms. Chen, I wanted to update you on the investigation. We've uncovered additional evidence about your brother's activities, and some of it impacts your situation directly." "What kind of evidence?" "We found emails between your brother and Jessica discussing plans to use your identity for additional purchases. They were planning to buy a second property using your credit, possibly a vacation home in California. If you hadn't reported the fraud when you did, your financial exposure could have been much worse." The revelation was both validating and terrifying. Michael and Jessica hadn't just stolen my identity once. They'd been planning to do it again and again until my credit was completely destroyed. I'd stopped them just in time to prevent even greater damage. "There's something else," Agent Thompson continued. "Jessica has agreed to cooperate with our investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence. She's providing information about other fraud rings operating in the Southwest. Your brother, however, has refused to cooperate and is maintaining his innocence despite overwhelming evidence. What does that mean for his sentence? If he's convicted at trial, he's looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison. If he'd cooperated, he might have received 5 to 7 years. His refusal to accept responsibility is going to cost him dearly. 15 to 20 years. Michael would be in his 50s when he got out, assuming he served his full sentence. His life, for all practical purposes, was over. The dreams he'd talked about, the future he'd planned, the success he'd thought he was building, all of it was gone. As I hung up the phone, I realized that while I'd saved myself from financial ruin, I'd also saved Michael from even worse consequences. If I'd stayed silent, if I'd allowed him to continue his criminal activities, he would have eventually been caught with much more serious charges. The evidence would have been overwhelming and his sentence would have been even longer. I'd chosen the hard path, the painful path, but ultimately the right path. Michael was going to prison because of his own choices, not because of mine. I'd simply ensured that justice was served before more innocent people were hurt. But knowing I'd made the right choice didn't make it hurt any less. As I prepared for bed that night, I grieved for the brother I'd lost. Not to prison, but to greed and criminal thinking that had transformed him into someone I couldn't recognize or trust. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the legal process continued. There would be hearings and depositions, media attention and family recriminations. The story was far from over, but tonight at least, the immediate danger was past. Michael and Jessica were in custody, their fraud scheme was exposed, and no more innocent families would fall victim to their crimes. It was a hollow victory, but it was still a victory. The phone calls from reporters started the next morning. Somehow, word had leaked that the FBI's arrests were connected to a family member's complaint, and several local news outlets wanted to interview me about turning in my own brother. I declined all requests and asked Agent Thompson about getting protection from media harassment. Unfortunately, criminal cases involving family members often attract media attention, she explained. The story has all the elements reporters love: family betrayal, financial fraud, federal arrests. I'd recommend limiting your public exposure until the trial is over. The trial. I'd been so focused on getting through the arrests and immediate aftermath that I hadn't fully considered what came next. I would have to testify against Michael in open court, describing his crimes in detail while he sat at the defendant's table. I would have to answer questions from his defense attorney, who would undoubtedly try to portray me as vindictive or greedy. My parents would be in the courtroom, watching me provide evidence that would send their son to prison for decades. Other family members would be there too, probably viewing me as the person who destroyed Michael's life rather than the victim of his crimes. The prospect was daunting, but I'd already come too far to back down now. Michael had made his choices, and now he would face the consequences. I just had to stay strong enough to see it through to the end. What I didn't know then was that the trial would reveal even more shocking details about Michael's transformation into a criminal. What I didn't know was that Jessica's cooperation would uncover a network of fraud that stretched across multiple states and involved dozens of victims. And what I definitely didn't know was that Michael's arrest was just the beginning of a much larger investigation that would ultimately expose corruption reaching into the highest levels of the real estate and banking industries. But those revelations were still to come. For now, I had to focus on rebuilding my life from the wreckage Michael had left behind, one day at a time. 3 weeks after Michael's arrest, I was sitting in a conference room at the federal courthouse, surrounded by stacks of financial documents that painted a picture of criminal activity far more extensive than I'd ever imagined. Jessica Martinez had been true to her word about cooperation, and the information she was providing had blown the investigation wide open. Agent Thompson sat across from me, along with federal prosecutor Sarah Williams, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who specialized in complex financial crimes. Between them lay evidence that transformed what I'd thought was a simple identity theft case into something that looked more like organized crime. "We need to prepare you for what's going to come out during the trial," Prosecutor Williams said, her voice serious. "Jessica's information has led us to discover that your brother and she were part of a much larger operation. The fraud network involves real estate agents, bank employees, and mortgage brokers across 3 states." I stared at the documents spread before me, trying to process the scope of what they were describing. "How many people are we talking about?" "At least 15 co-conspirators that we've identified so far," Agent Thompson replied. "Jessica and your brother were essentially middle management in a sophisticated fraud operation that's been running for over 4 years. They recruited victims, falsified documents, and coordinated with corrupt insiders to process fraudulent loans. And Michael knew all of this? According to Jessica's testimony, yes. Your brother wasn't just a victim who got in over his head. He was a key organizer who helped expand the operation from Arizona into Nevada and California. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. I'd been holding on to some hope that Michael had been manipulated into criminal activity, that he'd been more of a victim than a perpetrator. The idea that he'd been a willing participant in a multi-state fraud conspiracy was almost impossible to accept. Prosecutor Williams pulled out a thick folder marked Chen, Michael, Communications. These are emails and text messages we recovered from encrypted servers Jessica led us to. They show your brother discussing strategy, planning new fraud schemes, and celebrating successful thefts. She opened the folder and pulled out a printed email chain. This exchange is from 6 months ago, when they were planning to expand into the California market. I read the messages with growing horror. Michael's writing was casual, almost jovial, as he discussed finding new victims and ways to improve their document forgery techniques. There was no sign of reluctance or moral conflict, just a businessman discussing the growth of his criminal enterprise. One message particularly stood out. The Phoenix market is getting saturated. Too many people are starting to notice patterns. We need fresh territory with less sophisticated fraud detection. California's banking systems are more fragmented, which should make it easier to slip through cracks. He wrote this? His email address, his writing style, and we have Jessica's testimony that she was responding to his strategic recommendations. Agent Thompson confirmed. Your brother was the one pushing for expansion into new markets. Another message made my stomach turn. We need to be more careful about victim selection. The Chen sisters taught us that family members are ideal targets because they're less likely to report quickly and more likely to try to resolve things privately. We should prioritize people with close family relationships. The Chen sisters. They were talking about me and some other victim with the same last name. Michael had used our relationship as a template for targeting other families, exploiting the bonds of trust and love that should have protected people from exactly this kind of betrayal. How many families did they destroy? Prosecutor Williams consulted another document. Based on the evidence we've uncovered so far, at least 37 families across 3 states. Total financial damage is approximately $2 million, not including secondary costs like legal fees, credit repair, and emotional damage. $8.2 million. 37 families. The numbers were staggering, representing years of savings wiped out, retirements postponed, dreams destroyed. And my brother had been one of the architects of all that suffering. There's something else you need to know, Agent Thompson said, her expression grave. The operation wasn't just about mortgage fraud. They were also involved in what's called bust-out schemes, where they would establish businesses using stolen identities, build up credit lines, and then drain all available funds before disappearing. Chen Digital Solutions? That was just one of dozens of fake businesses they created. Jessica has provided us with documentation showing at least 50 different shell companies across 3 states, all using stolen identities as the basis for their formation. I thought about Michael's confidence when he'd talked about his business prospects, his certainty that everything would work out financially. He hadn't been delusional or overly optimistic. He'd been planning to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars through credit fraud and business identity theft. What about the other victims? Do they know what happened to them? We're in the process of contacting them now, Prosecutor Williams said. Many of them will be called to testify during the trial. You'll probably meet some of them, people whose lives were destroyed by the same fraud scheme that targeted you. The idea of facing other victims was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because it would prove I wasn't alone, that other people had experienced the same betrayal and violation. Terrifying because it would force me to confront the full human cost of Michael's crimes. Has Michael said anything about cooperating? His attorney has made no overtures about a plea deal, Prosecutor Williams replied. Your brother seems determined to fight the charges, despite overwhelming evidence. His strategy appears to be claiming that Jessica manipulated him, and that he was unaware of the larger fraud network. But you have evidence proving otherwise? Extensive evidence. Email communications, financial records, testimony from other co-conspirators who've agreed to cooperate. Your brother's fingerprints are all over the planning and execution of multiple fraud schemes. Agent Thompson leaned forward. Andrea, I need to prepare you for something. Michael's defense strategy is going to involve attacking your credibility and motivations. His attorney will try to portray you as a vindictive sister who misunderstood innocent business activities. What does that mean? It means they'll argue that the mortgage application was a legitimate family business arrangement that you retroactively decided to characterize as fraud out of jealousy or spite. They'll try to make it seem like you reported him because you wanted to hurt him, not because you were a victim of identity theft. The prospect of having my motives questioned in open court was deeply unsettling. Michael's defense team would essentially argue that I was lying about being victimized, that I'd been a willing participant who later changed my mind out of malice. Do we have evidence to counter that argument? Plenty, Prosecutor Williams assured me. The timeline clearly shows you had no knowledge of the mortgage application until after it was processed. Your immediate reporting to police, your cooperation with the investigation, the recording from the family dinner where Michael admits to using your identity without permission. All of this supports your testimony. Plus, Agent Thompson added, Jessica's cooperation has provided us with communications showing that your brother specifically discussed keeping you unaware of the fraud until after it was completed. There are messages where he talks about managing your reaction and convincing you to go along with it after the fact. I remembered Michael's confidence during our confrontation at the house, his certainty that he could convince me to become a willing partner in his scheme. He'd had it all planned out, how to reveal the fraud gradually, how to frame it as a business opportunity, how to make me feel like I was being unreasonable if I objected. Can I see those messages? Prosecutor Williams hesitated. They're quite disturbing. Your brother discusses you in very calculating terms, almost like you're a business asset to be managed, rather than a family member to be protected. I need to see them. She pulled out another folder and extracted several printed messages. As I read them, I felt like I was looking into the mind of a stranger who happened to share my DNA. The key with Andrea is timing, one message read. She's naturally trusting but also stubborn. If I approach this wrong, she'll dig in and become impossible to manage. Better to present her with fait accompli, and then gradually convince her it was always the plan. Another message was even worse. Andrea's credit profile is perfect for our needs, and her emotional attachment to family will prevent her from taking drastic action even if she's initially upset. She's the ideal victim because she won't want to destroy family relationships over money. The clinical calculation in his words was devastating. Michael had analyzed my personality, my emotional vulnerabilities, my likely reactions, all in service of a plan to exploit me for financial gain. I wasn't his sister in these messages. I was a target whose psychological profile made me useful for criminal purposes. There are more, Agent Thompson said gently. But I think you get the picture. I did get the picture, and it was horrifying. The brother I'd loved and trusted had spent months planning how to victimize me most effectively. He'd studied my emotional responses, identified my weaknesses, and crafted a strategy designed to maximize his criminal success while minimizing the risk of consequences. How long had he been planning this? Based on the email timestamps, at least 8 months before the mortgage application was submitted, Prosecutor Williams replied. Your brother didn't stumble into criminal activity. He methodically planned a scheme to steal your identity and exploit your emotional attachment to family. 8 months of planning. 8 months of looking me in the eye during family dinners, holiday celebrations, casual conversations, all while secretly plotting to destroy my financial life. The level of sustained deception was breathtaking in its callousness. What happens at the trial? You'll be one of the key witnesses, Prosecutor Williams explained. Your testimony will establish the personal impact of the fraud and counter any defense claims about family business arrangements. You'll need to describe your relationship with Michael, the timeline of events, and the emotional and financial impact of his crimes. Will he be there? Will I have to testify while he's watching? Yes. Defendants have the right to be present during witness testimony. Michael will be at the defense table throughout your testimony. The thought of looking across a courtroom at Michael, while describing how he'd betrayed and victimized me, was almost unbearable. But it was necessary if justice was going to be served, not just for me, but for the 36 other families whose lives had been destroyed by his criminal enterprise. When does the trial start? Jury selection begins in 6 weeks. The trial itself will probably last 3 to 4 weeks, given the complexity of the case and the number of witnesses. Agent Thompson pulled out a business card. I want you to start working with our Victim Services Coordinator, Dr. Patricia Walsh. She specializes in helping family members cope with the emotional trauma of testifying against relatives in federal cases. Is that really necessary? Andrea, you're about to go through one of the most difficult experiences a person can face, providing testimony that will send your own brother to prison for decades. Even though you know it's the right thing to do, the emotional toll can be severe. Dr. Walsh has helped hundreds of people navigate similar situations. As I left the federal courthouse that day, I felt overwhelmed by the scope of what I'd learned. Michael wasn't just a brother who'd made bad choices. He was a career criminal who'd helped orchestrate a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme that had devastated dozens of families. The person I'd grown up with, the man I'd loved and trusted, had been methodically planning to victimize me for months. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. The lawyers say Michael's trial starts soon. I hope you're proud of what you've done to this family. The accusation stung because it ignored the fundamental truth of the situation. I hadn't done anything to our family. Michael had. His choices had led to his arrest, his crimes had necessitated his prosecution, and his refusal to accept responsibility was extending his potential sentence. I was a victim who'd had the courage to seek justice, not a traitor who'd destroyed family unity. But I understood my mother's perspective. She was watching her son face decades in prison, and it was easier to blame me for reporting his crimes than to accept that he'd become someone capable of such extensive criminal activity. Anger at me allowed her to maintain her image of Michael as fundamentally good, just temporarily misguided. That evening, I met with Dr. Walsh at her office near the courthouse. She was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and the sort of calm demeanor that probably came from years of helping people through impossible situations. Family fraud cases are among the most emotionally complex situations we deal with, she explained as we settled into comfortable chairs in her office. You're simultaneously a victim seeking justice and a family member whose testimony will cause enormous pain to people you love. How do people get through it? By remembering that accountability and justice aren't acts of betrayal, they're acts of love. When family members commit serious crimes, holding them accountable is often the only way to prevent them from hurting more people and ultimately destroying themselves completely. My mother doesn't see it that way. She thinks I'm destroying Michael's life out of spite. That's a common reaction from family members who are still in denial about the scope of the criminal behavior. Your mother is grieving the loss of the son she thought she knew. It's easier to blame you than to accept that Michael chose to become someone capable of victimizing his own sister. Dr. Walsh pulled out a folder. I'd like to show you some statistics about family fraud cases. Understanding that you're not alone in this situation might help you process your emotions. The statistics were sobering but somehow comforting. Family members committed approximately 30% of all identity theft crimes, often causing more severe financial and emotional damage than stranger fraud, because victims were slower to recognize and report the abuse. Many victims struggled with guilt, self-blame, and family pressure to avoid prosecution. The most important thing to remember, Dr. Walsh said, is that you didn't choose this situation. Michael's criminal behavior forced you into an impossible position, where any choice you made would cause pain. You chose the option that protected innocent people from future victimization. As I drove home that night, I thought about all the other families whose lives had been destroyed by Michael's fraud network. Somewhere out there were 36 other people dealing with the same financial devastation I'd experienced. Some of them had probably been victimized by relatives they'd trusted, facing the same impossible choice between family loyalty and justice. The trial would be difficult, but it would also be an opportunity to speak for all those victims. My testimony wouldn't just be about my own experience. It would represent every family that had been betrayed by someone they'd trusted. Every person whose financial future had been stolen by criminals who saw their relatives as nothing more than convenient targets. Michael had made his choice when he decided to become a criminal. Now I was making mine by choosing to hold him accountable for the consequences of that choice. It was the hardest decision I'd ever made. But as I pulled into my driveway and saw the lights on in my apartment where Rachel was waiting with dinner and moral support, I knew it was the right one. The trial was going to change everything, but at least when it was over, justice would finally be served. And maybe, eventually, my family would understand that I'd saved them from even greater pain by preventing Michael from continuing his criminal activities until the consequences became truly catastrophic. But first, I had to find the strength to walk into that courtroom and tell the truth about what my brother had become, no matter how much it hurt to say the words out loud. The federal courthouse in Phoenix was packed on the morning of Michael's sentencing. I sat in the front row of the gallery, directly behind the prosecution table, wearing the navy blue suit Jonathan Hayes had recommended for my testimony 3 weeks earlier. The trial had lasted 22 days, during which 34 victims had testified about how Michael and Jessica's fraud network had destroyed their financial lives. Judge Patricia Hernandez, a no-nonsense woman with silver hair and steel gray eyes, had listened to every word of testimony with obvious disgust. The evidence against Michael had been overwhelming: financial records, communications, testimony from co-conspirators who'd accepted plea deals, and my own account of how he'd systematically planned to victimize his own sister. Michael sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, his hands shackled to a chain around his waist. He'd lost weight during his months in federal detention, and his face had the hollow look of someone who'd finally grasped the magnitude of his situation. His attorney, a public defender named Robert Martinez, had done his best with an impossible case, but the evidence had been devastating. The jury had deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts: conspiracy to commit wire fraud, identity theft, money laundering, and racketeering. Jessica had received 12 years after her cooperation deal. Several other co-conspirators had received sentences ranging from 3 to 8 years. Michael, as one of the ringleaders who'd refused to cooperate, faced the harshest punishment. Judge Hernandez cleared her throat and looked directly at Michael. "Mr. Chen, the court has reviewed your pre-sentence report, the victim impact statements, and the arguments from both counsel. The crimes you committed represent a systematic betrayal of trust that devastated dozens of families across multiple states." My mother sat 3 rows behind me, her face streaked with tears. My father hadn't come to the sentencing, unable to watch his son receive what would effectively be a life sentence. They still blamed me for Michael's situation, though the trial testimony had made it impossible to deny the scope of his criminal activities. "The court is particularly troubled by your decision to victimize your own sister," Judge Hernandez continued. "Family relationships are built on trust and mutual protection. Your deliberate exploitation of that trust to commit serious federal crimes represents a profound moral failure." Michael's shoulders shook, but I couldn't tell if it was from remorse or fear. During the trial, he'd maintained his innocence despite overwhelming evidence, claiming he'd been manipulated by Jessica and had no knowledge of the larger fraud network. The recorded conversations and email evidence had made those claims laughably false. "The financial impact of your crimes totaled $8.2 million, but the human cost cannot be measured in dollars alone. Families lost their homes, their savings, their trust in the financial system. Some victims will never fully recover from the damage you caused." During my testimony, I'd looked directly at Michael while describing how his betrayal had affected me. He'd stared at the table, refusing to meet my eyes, even when I'd explained how his planning emails had made me feel like a stranger in my own family. His lawyer had tried to suggest I was exaggerating the emotional impact, but the communications evidence had spoken for themselves. "Mr. Chen, do you have anything to say before the court imposes sentence?" Michael stood slowly, his chains rattling. For a moment, I thought he might finally acknowledge what he'd done, might offer some genuine remorse for the families he'd destroyed. Instead, he looked toward my mother and said, "I'm sorry this happened to our family. I never meant for things to go this far." Even at sentencing, he couldn't bring himself to accept responsibility. He was sorry things had happened, not sorry for the choices he'd made. He was concerned about our family's pain. not the dozens of other families he'd victimized. It was a perfect encapsulation of the selfishness that had led him to criminal behavior in the first place. Judge Hernandez's expression hardened. "Your lack of remorse is noted, Mr. Chen. The court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. You are ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $8.2 million to the victims of your crimes." 25 years. Michael would be 58 when he was released, assuming he served his full sentence. His life, for all practical purposes, was over. The dreams he'd talked about, the success he'd thought he was building, the future he'd planned, all destroyed by his own criminal choices. As the marshals led Michael away, he finally looked at me. There was no hatred in his eyes anymore, just a hollow recognition of what he'd lost. I felt no satisfaction in his punishment, only a deep sadness for the person he could have been if he'd made different choices. Outside the courthouse, several of the other victims approached me. Maria Gonzalez, whose retirement savings had been stolen to fund one of Michael's shell companies, thanked me for having the courage to report the crimes. David Kim, who'd lost his house when Michael used his identity for a fraudulent mortgage, said my testimony had helped him understand that he wasn't alone in his experience. "It takes tremendous strength to testify against family," Maria told me. "But you saved other people from going through what we went through." That perspective helped ease some of the guilt I still carried about Michael's fate. By reporting his crimes, I'd prevented him from victimizing more innocent families. The 25-year sentence wasn't just punishment for past crimes. It was protection for future potential victims. Agent Thompson found me as I was leaving the courthouse steps. "How are you holding up?" "Better than I expected. It's over finally. Your bank has agreed to remove your name from the mortgage based on the court's findings. You should be completely clear of any financial liability within 60 days. And the house, quote, being sold to pay restitution to the victims. Michael and Jessica won't profit from any of their criminal activities." I drove home through the Phoenix streets where this nightmare had begun 6 months earlier. So much had changed since that day when my credit card was declined at Target. I'd lost a brother but gained an understanding of my own strength. I'd endured family condemnation but helped deliver justice to dozens of victims. Rachel was waiting with champagne and takeout from our favorite restaurant. "How does it feel to have your life back?" "Strange. Like I'm waking up from a very long, very complicated dream." "Any regrets?" I thought about the question seriously. Michael was going to spend the next 25 years in prison because of evidence I'd provided. My relationship with my parents might never recover. Our family gatherings would forever be marked by his absence and the circumstances that led to it. "No regrets," I said finally. I did what I had to do. That night, I deleted Michael's contact information from my phone, boxed up the family photos that included him, and began the process of moving forward with my life. The brother I'd grown up with was gone, replaced by someone who'd chosen criminal gain over family loyalty. I was done mourning who he used to be, and ready to focus on who I was becoming. The woman who'd been too shocked to believe her credit card was declined had evolved into someone capable of standing up to federal prosecutors, testifying in open court, and choosing justice over family pressure. I'd discovered reserves of strength I hadn't known I possessed. 6 months later, I received a letter from Michael in federal prison. It was 3 pages of self-pity and blame, complaining about prison conditions, and suggesting that I could help reduce his sentence by recanting my testimony. I read it once, then threw it away without responding. Some relationships can't be repaired, and some betrayals can't be forgiven. Michael had made his choice when he decided to steal my identity and victimize innocent families. I'd made mine when I chose to hold him accountable. I was finally free, financially, emotionally, and legally, from the wreckage of his criminal choices. The nightmare was over, and my real life could begin again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.